Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. Today marks the final instalment of our April coverage on the Unification Church with an interview with Lisa. Lisa was kind enough to send me a signed copy of her written memoir, To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence, and I cannot tell you how incredible this was to read. And now we have Lisa here herself to offer her perspective and story on her life inside the Unification Church. Hello, Lisa, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to be having a deep dive into the Unification Church, and this is going to be a roundup episode of this month's coverage. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yes, thank you, Casey. Hello, everyone. I am Lisa Kohn, and I'll say my line since you're asking me to introduce, and then I can say whatever else you want me to say. But the way I describe my childhood is the best seats I ever had at Madison Square Garden, which is a huge indoor arena in New York City. Best seats I ever had there were at my mother's wedding, because my mom got married on July 1st, 1982 with 2,075 other couples. And on the other hand, the best cocaine I ever had was from my father's friend, the judge. And that is the basis of why I'm perhaps still standing in here, but that's my childhood.
Mm-hmm. And after reading your memoir that you so kindly sent to me to read ahead of time, that sums it up perfectly. I when you emailed that sentence over to me, I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. Then I read the book and thought, yep, that sums it up perfectly. So for anyone who hasn't listened to any previous episodes or might be unsure, what is the Unification Church?
The Unification Church, I like to refer to it as, in America, the cult of all cults in the American age of cults. It's was founded as the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity in the 1950s in Korea. Reverend Sung Myung Moon was the Messiah. We're never allowed to say that, but he was the Messiah, and he was from South Korea, and it was one of the huge cults. It was a very, when I was in it, puritanical cult. In the States, it was the people who are standing on the street corners selling flowers. It's the huge mass weddings where, with my mom, 275 other couples, but they've had even bigger weddings than that. So it's I can give you more background about it, with the teachings and stuff. Would that be good?
Yes? Yeah. I think that would be a great place to go.
So the way I describe it, and I describe it from the way I knew it when I was there versus maybe things I found out afterwards. It's a combination of Judeo-Christian thought and then Eastern philosophy. So basically, God created Adam and Eve, and they were supposed to grow, to mature, to grow to perfection, and then multiply, have kids, and take dominion over the earth. But instead, Eve was seduced by Lucifer and had sex, and Eve then seduced Adam and had sex, and that's the fall of man. And mankind has disappointed God for thousands and thousands of years. And then Jesus came, and Jesus was supposed to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth, but Jesus failed and he got killed instead. So he built the kingdom of heaven in heaven, and the Messiah needed to come again, the second coming of Jesus, to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. And miracle of miracles, when you look at the way the divine principle, the teachings of the Unification Church go, the Messiah had to be born between somewhere around 1920 and 1930 and in Korea.
Right.
So convenient, because that would be Moon. But it was so a lot of puritanical Christian beliefs, a lot of the duality, the yin yang, the object subject of Eastern philosophy. And in retrospect, what I've come to learn is, there's many, many different cults or Christian factions in Korea that believe that the Messiah was going to come from Korea. It's apparently a very messianic culture. But yeah, that was kind of the basis of the teachings.
And the interesting thing I found after reading your memoir, and I'm going to keep mentioning the memoir, which is called To the Moon and Back. And I'm not going to give too much away, because I think it's something I really encourage any of the listeners who are interested in learning more about the Unification Church to go and check out this book, because it was just absolutely incredible. So I'm going to keep referring back to it, but try not to give too much of it away. But what I gathered from your writings is that your experience with the Unification Church is quite unique in comparison to some of the other people I've spoken to. So I've spoken to some people who joined in later life, sort of 20s, 30s, who were seekers looking for something, were love bombed and had those experiences, or, you know, proselytized to on the street and those types of situations. But then there are those who were born into the movement and were second generation Unification Church members, but you didn't have that experience. Your experience is slightly different to that.
Yes. So my mom would be the seeker who was love bombed, and it really is a unique experience. The love bombing, it is intentional, and yes, a lot of the people you've spoken to, their parents were also married in that huge mass wedding in Madison Square Garden, like Jen, only that they were born to those parents. No, so my mom and dad, they got together very young. My mom got pregnant. They got married when they were 19, had my brother, had me when they were 20. By the time I was 2 or 3, they had split, and it was the 60s. So I was the child of hippies in America, right? And it was everything you might think that entails, you know, a lot of drugs flowing around, a lot of nudity and sex and encounter groups and primal screaming and, you know, Woodstock, and just the whole hippie culture was our life. And then in January of 1974, well, before that, so the summer between my 2nd and 3rd grade in the States, so like 7 and 8 years old, my mom bought a van for my father because we lived on the East Coast of the States, and we were going to drive to California to go move on to a commune, like we should have. And instead, my grandmother got sick, so we moved in with my grandparents, and my grandmother passed, and we stayed with my grandfather. My mom's taking care of everything for my grandfather. And then her friend with whom she used to hitchhike across country every summer, told her to go hear Reverend Moon speak in Princeton, New Jersey in January of 1974. And my mom went and came back and was like, this is amazing. It's true. Jesus wasn't supposed to die. And it took a couple of months, but eventually she got love bombed, and the members convinced her to go up to Barrytown, New York, a huge indoctrination center in upstate New York. And she went up for the weekend and came back and went up for a week and came back and went up for another week, and basically spent the summer there. And one weekend, you know, put my brother Robbie and I in the van and drove us up, and we pull up to the big building. We go into this huge gymnasium, this huge gym, and all the women, all the sisters are sitting on the floor on one side, and all the men, the brothers, are sitting on the floor on the other side. And within moments, Reverend Moon walks in and starts speaking, and that was it. He was my Messiah, right? And I can give many more details, but so I wasn't born into it, and I didn't choose it on my own. My mom brought me in. And what I like to point out is by the time we got there, it was a haven because of all the craziness beforehand in my life and my brother's life. So it was a haven, and everybody loved us. We had all these brothers and sisters who adored us. And then it's also unique, and I can give some of the story if you want, but we ended up never living in the church, but living with my father, who lived a life of, I like to say, sex, drugs, and squalor. So we're living with Satan in like the East Village of New York City in the 1970s, but believing in the Messiah and spending the weekends and holidays and vacations in the church, you know, proselytizing and fundraising and living the life of a Moonie. But then, you know, Monday through Friday, go back and live again with Satan, with my dad, who's living a life that was just horrific to me. So so it's only my brother has the same kind of craziness of the two worlds going back and forth.
And I think there was something mentioned briefly in your book about how your mum was looking for something for a while and kind of tried a number of different things before this particular movement stuck.
Yes. You name it, she pretty much tried it. There was a Hinduism phase, a Buddhism phase, definitely a long macrobiotic phase. There was a born-again Christian phase. There was, my mom went through phases of she would have not talking days. She'd put up a sign that said not talking today and not talk to us that day. She was always searching. Now, some people I know say, well, she became a Moonie because she was searching. And I clearly have to say, everyone is susceptible, right? You don't need to be a seeker to end up in one of these situations. But my mom was definitely a seeker, always looking for something. Absolutely.
And your relationship with your mum, you felt very, very close and protective of her.
Yeah, in retrospect, I probably was the mom, right? So my parents were my mom, again, they were 20 when they had us. And to this day, my mom's not all the way sometimes mature, it seems. So yeah, I was always very close. And especially when my parents split, my dad left and I was rocked and terrified. We used to live in the bottom floor of a building, and my mom would go down the hallway to do the laundry, and I would stand in the doorway screaming because I was convinced she was going to leave too, and she wouldn't come back. And ironically, she did end up leaving us, right, to move into the church. But yeah, so my whole world revolved around my mother. Even at that point before the church, I was terrified of my dad's life. So I was always more comfortable with my mom and always wanted to be with my mom. Yeah.
So would you say that is a pretty good summary of what your life was like before the church entered sort of any part of your knowledge?
Yeah, it was, yeah, that's a pretty good summary. Yeah, it was a chaotic, it was unsettling, it was scary. My mom had violent boyfriends. I don't think I knew they were violent then, but I know they were violent now, so I must have known they were violent in some way. There was violence between my mom and dad. Yeah, it was it was chaotic. It was chaotic. Not safe. Not safe.
And once the church kind of entered your life, you've talked about how your mum kind of gradually became a member, going to visit in Barrytown for kind of days, then weeks, then months, and eventually moved into a building full time.
Yeah.
How did your life change when the church became part of your narrative?
So again, it was a haven. It was, there were rules, there was structure. I like to say my mom started wearing a bra. She became more normal, like other parents, even though she wasn't because she was a Moonie. And well, on one hand, it fueled the belief and need I had for something to kind of have structure. And the other hand, in much retrospect, it fueled the belief that I was damaged and sinful and bad, right? Because you do learn that you're damaged and sinful and bad in a cult like that. So it fueled me in the good and the bad, I guess. And so what happened was my mom started going in more and more and more and more. We lived outside of New York City, about an hour out of New York City. And then she finally sat us down in a chair and she said to my brother and I'm maybe 11 and he's maybe 12. She said, I feel like I need to be there more often. What do you think I should do? And we said, you should leave. leave, go, serve God and true parents, Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon. Leave us and go. And so ironically, she moved into New York City to live in a church center full time, to run what was called then the IFA, the International Family Association, which was the group for people who had kids and couldn't move into the church. And even more ironically, my mom spent most of her time in the church caring for all the other blessed children. So to this day, I meet people and they say, oh my God, your mother took such good care of me.
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, she did. So she moves out and I'm 11 or 12. And I didn't really realize this, but my grandfather was also a judge. And when my grandmother died, he got depressed and he stopped practicing his cases. And then when my mom left, he got more depressed and he really stopped practicing his cases and taking care of his clients. And then he got disbarred. He got kicked out of being a lawyer and a judge. And apparently the police were circling the block on a suicide watch for him. And I was shopping, cooking, cleaning, running the house. I was, running everything at that age when I think about it now. And then my grandfather was supposed to go to court and maybe would end up in jail. And instead his doctor put him in the psychiatric ward of the local hospital. And Robbie and I got pulled out of school and got shuffled around to a bunch of different people for a couple of weeks where they tried to figure out what to do with us. And someone went to go get my mom and she said, it's not my problem. And she didn't come back. to get us. And then Danny, who's my dad, finally found out what was going on, and he came and got us. And that's when we ended up moving into New York City to live with him in sex, drugs, and squalor in the East Village. And so that began the dual life of my life is the church. This is my Messiah. I'm best friends with his kids, and I live, in squalor, and my dad is doing drugs, and I don't feel safe, and there's not so nice people around. So that kind of started that whole part of it.
And something that I really got from your writing is how, one thing I really got from your writing is just how severe the love bombing is when you first start attending these meetings and going and meeting the other children and the parents of and kind of the entire congregation in those areas when you first started attending.
It's a combination of incredible love and attention, and you're like the center of the universe, and everybody's effusively loving to you in a very puritanical, safe way. But I was a kid, so effusively loving. And at the same time, and I was just actually the other day talking to someone I grew up with in the church, whom I reconnected with, a blessed child. And we're talking about, we were taught from the very beginning that, when Adam and Eve fell, it broke God's heart, and God's heart has been broken for 6,000 years. And God is sobbing and weeping and like devastated over what mankind has done. And so if you make a mistake, you will break God's heart. So it's like all this love and incredible amounts of guilt and shame and responsibility that just push you into being terrified to do anything.
Yeah. And that definitely comes across in the writing as well. It kind of almost felt like I was being suffocated when you would not know whether to, talk to friends about certain things or go and do certain activities. And you'd be kind of like, but I want to, because I'm that age and I'm supposed to be doing these things. But at the same time, I don't want to upset God, and I don't want to upset true parents. And, so I really, it was that comes across so well in your writing.
The concept of breaking God's heart, right? What a heavy shame bomb.
Yeah, and a big responsibility to put on a child as well.
Yes. So, and I like to say, so my mom left, asked us what she should do, and we said, you should leave. And there's a concept in the church, I'm sure you've heard of it, of indemnity, paying indemnity. So you suffer, I pay indemnity, I suffer to pay for all the sins of my ancestors, and so that my descendants don't have to suffer, right? And so everyone would say to us, oh, you're so amazing. Thank you so much. You're so lucky to live without your mother. What indemnity you're paying. You're so beautiful and special and wonderful to live without your mother. And so I knew that when I missed her, I was sinful, right? So I couldn't be sad. No wonder I learned not to have needs, right? I couldn't miss my mom, but I did miss my mom. Of course I missed my mom, but I couldn't miss my mom because that was breaking God's heart every time I missed my mom and didn't want her. Like one time I remember I called her and I sat on hold for 45 minutes because she forgot I was on the phone, right? Those things would happen and I could not be upset because she was serving God. So it
just goes round and round and round.
Yeah. On the brain. Yeah.
And so what is it like being a child in the church?
Wow.
Your story is different in this sense as well to other people I've spoken to about what their life is like in the church.
Yeah.
Because of your relationship with the children of Reverend Moon.
Yeah.
So I guess if you could let us know generally what life is like for a child, and then to kind of specifically talk about your situation, that would be great.
Absolutely. So what's it like generally? You're basically not allowed to be a child. Like if you think about it, there's the BITE model, Stephen Hassan's BITE model, right? They control your behavior, information, thinking, and emotions. All of that is absolutely controlled. So when I look back on it now, like your brain is supposedly developing, but we were literally told if you ever questioned anything, it's Satan in your brain trying to win you back from God. So you learn not to think, right? And I was told, I knew that if I missed my mom, I was sinful. So I learned not to feel, right? We were told what to wear, what to do, how to behave. So there's on one hand, a lot of control. On the other hand, there's this beautiful vision of one world under God and one big family, and the story of the divine principle is a beautiful story, right? So it's like all this beauty and hope, but all this pressure and all these rules, all of that going on at the same time. And so, yeah, I was unique. One, believed but lived outside and couldn't tell anybody about my dad because I was embarrassed because he was Satan. And I was best friends with Moon's children, the true children. And I was also good friends with the blessed children. So the true children, the children of the Messiah, there's like nothing supposedly more special than that. And the reality is they were just kids. Mm-hmm. And they were, on one hand, they had no rules. They could get away with anything. We literally would throw stones at members, right? And the members would say, thank you for throwing stones at me.
Oh, gosh.
And on the other hand, they were watched like in a fishbowl and judged for everything they did for being a child. So, right, that's their life. And then there's the blessed children, right? And so in the big blessed marriages, when couples are blessed in marriage by Reverend Moon, their original sin is removed. And so their children are born without original sin. The blessed children are very special. There's a lot of pressure on them. Very special because they have no original sin. And then there's me, right? And back then, they didn't have a word for it. Now in the church, they call them Jacob's children. Those of us who are children in the church but are born with original sin because we were brought into the church as children. So I'm best friends with like the truest kids, like the most holy, special people, and the blessed children, and the sinful me. But I was the most well-behaved because I firmly believed and tried to stay in all the rules, and they didn't. And they had security guards, and the security guards would say, Lisa, you have to get them to behave. And I'm like, how am I going to do all this? Right. So it was I remember even back then, I used to say to members, it's hard to grow up. It's even harder to grow up in the church because you weren't allowed to do all the things that kids do. Right. And it was hard. I don't know how to put it. It was hard. Yeah. Yeah.
And how did your relationship with the children progress throughout your time in the church?
When I first met them, when they had just come over to America. Specifically, I was friends with Injun and Unjun and really with Injun. They had just come over to America. They are 2 and 4 years younger than me. Injun's 2 years younger and Unjun was 4 years younger than me. They spoke no English. We were the only other kids, so we just played. And then as we all grew, right, I'm older than them, but they are definitely wilder than I am. So I would always, whenever I would, see them on the holidays or sneak off on Sunday service when Moon would speak, would always get in trouble for doing that. We would always sneak away from the guards and play, but it was always a sense of, I don't deserve to be with you. And I can't actually be myself and I can't let you know who I am. And you probably don't actually really like me because I'm sinful. And this went on for a long time. And then, as you know, from reading the book, so when I am about 16, first what happens is, so the summer between 11th and 12th grade in the States. So that would be, I was 16, almost 17 years old. Danny, my dad sent me to music camp for the summer to keep me away from the church, I'm convinced, because every other summer we've been in the church. And I go to music camp, and for the first time known to me, I become friends with people who are gay or bisexual. And it's a huge sin in my puritanical church. And so I write my mom and I'm like, what should I do? These are my friends. And she writes back and she says, they're sinful, they're evil. You can either convert them or just stay away from them. And for the first time, I can't agree with it. And again, now I know that Satan is in me because I'm disagreeing with what I'm being told to do in the church. So I know I'm inhabited by Satan and I'm not agreeing with my mom and I'm confused and tormented. And I come back from camp and one of my friends, a blessed child, a 6-year-old friend of mine, was seduced and having an affair with our Sunday school teacher. This is where the soap opera part happens. So he has seduced her, they're having an affair, and in order to keep all the blame and no one from noticing, she spreads rumors about me. She says, I want to sleep with all the men. And Moon hears the rumors, believes the rumors, and makes a decree that only blessed children can play with the true children to keep me away from Injun. I like to say my Messiah banished me. So I'm 16-ish, she's 14, and I don't see her again until, as in the book, decades later. And the first thing she says to me is, "I'm sorry, my father did that to us," right? So it was like this weird, I don't deserve to be your friend. I adore you. You're holy. I'm sinful, but I love you. And then gone, right? Gone, pulled away from her. So
there's a lot of things, that's sort of a recurring theme, I think, throughout the key moments of your kind of your story. And it must be, you, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn when I say this, but I feel like you have probably had to do quite a lot of mourning throughout your life, even though nobody's, well, you spoke about your grandmother passing away, but you were living with your grandfather, and then you couldn't live with him anymore, and then your mother wasn't there anymore, and then your best friends, you couldn't see them anymore. It's kind of just feels like so much was taken away from you, but that steel rod that you mentioned that you have as a backbone kind of stops you from, I don't know, it's just interesting when I read through it to just, it's actually making me tear up now thinking about it, all these things that have happened. And it's like you don't get a chance to step back and think, I'm just losing things all over the place. They're just, I mean, there's a few relationships that you had in the book where you found it really hard to let go of the person. And I think maybe I was thinking when I was reading it, maybe that's where it comes from. You're terrified of all this loss because these things just keep happening.
Yeah, no, I've never looked at it that way, but yes. So I've looked at it a lot of different ways. It's always fascinating to me when, like, I would say the thing about writing a memoirs, and strangers have these epiphanies on your life, and you're like, oh, like I have a client who had it. I'll tell you later who had this epiphany. I'm like, oh, never thought that. That's right. But I've never, it's true, right? What I do know that it's love that saved me, right? So the love of the church was a saving grace, right? And then when I finally left the church, it was the love of my friends that saved me and kept me from totally imploding. But yeah, I lost a hell of a lot along the way. And I do cling. I do try too hard. I do work too hard to save relationships. I do. And I have, and that's probably a good part of it, because there was a lot of loss, and I wasn't allowed, right? My mom left. I wasn't allowed to be sad. When I was banished from Injun, right? Well, it's the Messiah. So I can't question it. Like I couldn't. And I've said for years, like when I left the church, I lost everything. Like other than my mother and my brother, my mom was in for a while and my brother left soon after me. Like I lost every person, every place, everything that mattered to me. I mean, because I do know that my life's purpose is to love. I'm a very gushy mushy person. And so I loved so many. I walked into the Unification Church saying, I can't do anything to help God, so I'm going to love all my brothers and sisters. And I loved so many people. And then boom, never saw them again. Yeah, a lot of loss.
And in a way, it's very telling that an entire rule or an entire piece of doctrine or whichever phrase you want to use to apply to the situation was created by Reverend Moon because he was so worried about the influence that you specifically as an individual could have on his children.
Yeah.
So that must make you feel a certain way.
Well, yeah, like, look, the Messiah.
He's making rules up because of you.
Funny is I was the like squeaky cleanest of anybody. Like to this day, I will I reconnected with one of my friends who I grew up with in the church in the book. And she's like, yeah, I'm talking to my brothers. And we're all like, why Lisa? Like Lisa was like, they all tried all these things. I didn't do anything. And I got in trouble, which is another, like, that's my, one of my things is like, one of my scars from the church is this terror of disappointing people, messing up, whatever. But I got in trouble so many times for things I never actually did, right?
Yeah.
So it's a mind blank bad word there, right? It's just like totally messes with your mind when you start to look at that stuff. Yeah.
And I think on top of that as well, you punish yourself for doing things that you haven't even done yet as well. So you've got all this punishment coming from things that you haven't done that you're being blamed for. And then you're also doing that to yourself before you've even committed to doing something that may be sinful in the eyes of the church. So there's so much conflict and everything going on. And it just comes across so perfectly what it is like to be involved in such a highly coercive environment. It just comes across so well.
And it was like this special, I refer to it like, I'm not an onion, you know, people say peeling the onion. I'm not an onion. Have you ever had a ball of yarn that you've forgotten to make into a ball, and then it just becomes this knot and it takes like 3 days to undo it? That's my brain, because if you look at it, right? So I do believe that I actually was molested when I was very young. Right. So then you take that and the shame that puts in one's body and psyche and soul and everything. And then from there, you know, and then my dad leaves. And then I end up in this puritanical cult where I'm sinful and sex is bad. Right. And then my mom leaves. Right. So I'm abandoned again. And then I live with Satan, and my dad is completely inappropriate. And he used to call me slut as a term of endearment, and used to offer to sell me to his friends for drugs. And then I don't even realize this. People read the book. All these older men in the church are completely inappropriate with me. Right. And I'm this like sweet, clean little kid, but all this sexual stuff is going on around me in a puritanical cult. And I already know that I'm damaged because I was molested when I was a child. And then the Messiah banishes me for being a bad influence. It's like, boom.
Yeah.
I wonder it's a mess in there sometimes, right?
And this is like all happening before you're like 25 as well. Like the whole book takes place.
Yes. Yeah. And so then I felt guilty and punished myself for things I never did. And then when I left the church, I punished myself. I tried to self-destruct in many different ways for leaving the Messiah.
And before we get to sort of the ramifications, so to speak, of kind of leaving the Unification Church, what was your education like? Because sometimes people are homeschooled, sometimes people attend public school. So what was it like for you and your experience?
It was public school all the way. It's funny because when I do book readings in the States, right, I ended up at Cornell University, which is one of the Ivy League universities in the States, supposedly one of the better schools. And invariably people are like, how'd you go? Like with all this craziness, how'd you go to Cornell? And if I'm in a room with people from my high school, which is Stuyvesant, which is a specialized math and science high school in New York City, they're like, that's because she went to Sty. And I went to Stuyvesant because when we moved in with my dad, so it was always public school, and then we moved in with my dad, and I can say many tough things about him, but when we first moved in, he kept us out of school for a month because he's like, you guys have been through the worst and we're just going to play. And then he went, and it's the 70s in New York City, so the public school system is horrific. And there were apparently 2 good junior high schools relatively nearby, neither in our district. And he took us to one, and the principal said, they can't come here. And he said, well, then they're not going to go to school, as only my father will do. And so she put us in the school. And the junior high school I went to was a feeder school for my high school. And then my high school is a feeder school for college. And I test well, and I'm smart, whatever, I can do well in school. So my education was fine. And that's when when I finally really crashed and burned, I looked so good on the outside. That I thought I was fine, right? And I looked fine, and I had a good degree, and I had a good job, and I managed not to get too addicted to drugs. Like I skirted disaster so many times, but I was outwardly completely functional. Yeah. So I looked good on the outside.
And what's it like being a part of mainstream education and being a member of the Unification Church?
So yeah, when we first joined, I tried to convert people, and they thought I was crazy and weird. Then we moved in with my dad, and that was Reverend Moon. He spoke at Madison Square Garden, and then he spoke at Yankee Stadium. And I literally used to go to junior high school. I'm like, 12, 13 years old, and I'm going to school with this huge button pinned on my shirt with Reverend Moon's face on it, right? And nobody is more, hated in New York City than Moon at the time. So people are like, "Are you a Moonie?" And totally got, wasn't fun. And so then when I went to high school, I somehow knew not to tell anybody anymore. And so the story is I became friends with this group of friends, right? And I became friends, but I really kept a distance because, they're all sinful and they're all have bad influences. And I would go every weekend upstate. I called it, I'm going upstate, because at that point I lived in New York City with my dad, and my mom was either up in Tarrytown, New York, where where the nursery was, and there was a lot of Moonies up there, or even when she was gone, I would still go up there. And so apparently I saw one of my friends a number of years ago, and he's like, "Yeah, we're all there one day going, where does Lisa go? Where does Lisa go? Where does Lisa go on the weekends?" And someone who had gone to junior high school with me came up and said, "Guys, she's a Moonie. Don't you know she's a Moonie?" And they were like, "No," because I knew not to tell. And then, when I started to finally pull away, and then more and more people found out, and it really was, it was just really hard. Even like when I was fully leaving, long story short, when everything happened, I ended up in counseling my second year of uni, my sophomore year. And I talked about all these things, but I never talked about growing up in the Unification Church with that counselor, because I knew she would judge it. So my first year, I was still a Moonie. My second year, I'm, anorexic and starving myself, but never talking about the fact that I grew up in a cult, because I knew not to talk about it. So it was living these, I hid my dad from the church. I heard the church from the world. It was everybody out here hated that. Everybody in here hated that. It was really caught between. Every now and then my brother and I think about, how did we go back and forth every week, right? How did we go from one to the other? It must have been harder than I even realize for myself to assimilate in the two different worlds.
Yep. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. And that's something that I was gonna mention. You go through public school with your father and staying with him, and then on the weekends you're running as fast as you can to where your mum is and all of your brothers and sisters in the church, and going to play with the true children and to hear Reverend Moon speak, and then going back to your father's again, and I mean, to kind of talk about the yin and yang, that's kind of like it's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? It's two completely different lives, and you're going from one to the other without any respite, without taking a breath.
Right. And two completely different and hard lives, right? It's not like I went to a safe environment with my dad. I went back to life which didn't feel safe with my dad, and then I left there to life which wasn't psychologically safe, even though I would never admit it, with my mom. And so it really, it's a reason I messed up. No, I'm kidding.
How does your journey through the church progress to the point where you decide to leave?
So you've talked to a lot of people, right? And so we talk about people who are physically in and mentally in, physically out and mentally out, physically in and mentally out, physically out and mentally in, right? So my story, I become friends with people who are gay or bisexual. I start to question. I come back, Moon banishes me, and I go to my last year of school, and I go, okay, you joined as a 10-year-old. You're a kid. I'm now 17. So now as a 17-year-old, you're going to pull back a little bit and make an adult decision to join and never question again. Like this, you have to go all in. So I stopped going to the church every week, and I spend more time at home with Danny on the weekends. I become friends with more people in school. I spend more time with my friends in school. I enjoy being with my friends in school. I find more unconditional love and support than I did find in my supposedly church, which is all about love. And I become very tormented and confused. And as I feel myself pulling away, and I know I'm sinning, and I don't know. And I start experimenting. I experiment with alcohol. And then in April of my last year, I throw a party for my best friend and for this boy. And I get drunk in the party, and I kiss this boy. And then I have a boyfriend, right? Biggest sin. And all hell breaks loose. And, my mom locks me up in the New Yorker hotel and takes me up to Barrytown. And what are you doing? And members stop me on the street and yell at me, and everybody's all freaked out, and you're going to fall, you're going to sin. And I'm confused, right? I'm like, oh, my whole high school yearbook is like, what will you do? What will you do? What will you do? And so I go off to university, I go away to school, and my boyfriend Adam stays in New York City. And I decide I have to break up with him because I have to go back, and I can't break God's heart, fail, fall, be yet another person who lets God down. And I go off to college, to university, and I don't break up with him. And I still knew Moon was the Messiah. I just didn't want to do it. Like I talked to a lot of the blessed children who like knew from the age of 13 and couldn't wait to get out. And not that their path was any easier than mine, but I'm so jealous of that because I decided not to do it and knew how awful and sinful I was. Everything. I was all the like the it's not low self-esteem, like the loathing, the self-loathing that was in me. I knew it all to be true because I was disappointing God. But so what happens is as my brother says, I never left. I just like slowly pulled away. So my first year, I was in school in upstate New York at Cornell, where they do have these huge gorges on both sides of the campus with bridges over them. And it's a story about people jumping, but I did. There was one day I walked across the bridge and I almost didn't make it because it would have been easier to jump and die than to leave. But I didn't jump, right? That's the first time I don't know. And I went back, and then I started talking to more and more people about it, and people would ask me about it. And I have a very dear friend who I think every night we'd be in a room and I would say, but what if it's right? But what if it's right? But what if it's right? And to which he finally said, well, what if it is right, but it's not right for you? Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, that's what I held to. But then my sophomore year, my second year, I actually finally had sex with my boyfriend, and then I stopped eating, probably to kill myself for doing that, right? And I like to say I'm not heavy now, and I was probably about 30 pounds lighter than I am now. My junior year, I went away to uni at Sterling for a semester, probably the most free time I ever had. And then when I came back, my boyfriend Adam was dealing and doing a lot of cocaine. So I started doing a hell of a lot of cocaine, including with my father, including with my father's friend, the judge. And finally, at one point, realized the summer after, between like that year and my last year, that I was doing it every day and looking for it every day and had to stop. So I managed to stop that. And then my last year, I got involved with someone who already had a girlfriend, and I just got into worse and worse relationships. And after college, I got engaged to someone who drank a hell of a lot and was really, really mean to me when he drank. And when I look back, I'm like, I was just punishing myself and slowly trying to kill myself, I think, for how awful and sinful and failing God and all of that I carried. I mean, I've been out. I mean, that was 40 years ago, right? When I slowly drifted away. And, my brother one day sat my mom down and said, I'm out. I still haven't told my mom I'm out. I'm like, maybe, wow, I'll tell her. But I slowly drifted away. But only like this past summer, I was in intense trauma therapy. And I realized that there hopefully was, maybe still is, a part of me that knows I should have jumped. I should have jumped rather than leave, right? And that's how deeply that belief was carved into me. So, yeah.
And do you remember at what point you realized that maybe Moon isn't the Messiah?
No. No, I don't. That's a good question. Right now, I know that, although I can tell you that when the book came out, people would ask me things, and I learned some of the, I think, truths of how the church was actually really founded that Teddy, I'm sure, shared with you. And I could not talk badly about Moon. Like, someone would ask me a question and I literally would not be able to talk because my brain would shut down. So when I left, I could not think about anything about God, right? Because if I thought about God, it was the God of my childhood and I needed to die. So I just went like this, hugely like that. And then I ended up engaged to this man who drank a hell of a lot. And luckily, before I got married to him, someone pointed me in the direction of Al-Anon, the 12-step program for those of us hugging the alcoholics. And I literally, I go to my first meeting thinking, tell me if he's an alcoholic. There's no way I would ever be with an alcoholic because I'm way too functional and I'm smart. And only to discover, my dad's dad was in A for the last 5 years of his life. My dad drank and drugged every day of my life. My grandmother, my dad's mom, was addicted to everything under the sun. And I grew up in a cult. Like there's every reason. And so that's when I started looking at it. And I remember at one point I ended up in, therapy in the beginning and group therapy. And the group therapist turned to me and she said, you have to integrate the church in order to heal. And I said, no blanking way. Like the only way I'm going to be surviving is to never look at this. Now, clearly I have, but that's the only way I could keep it.
Mm-hmm.
When did I know he wasn't the Messiah? I don't know. That probably took a really long time for me to be able to. And like I said, my brain still wouldn't talk evil, badly about him. It took a really long time for me to say that and know that. And I will tell you, maybe other people won't say this to you, but I do believe it to be true. Almost everyone I've talked to, if not everyone, says at one point, what if I die and I find out it was right?
I have these conversations a lot because right?
Like I know he's not, but what if he was?
Yeah. And the listeners are already gonna know probably what I'm gonna say, but I've spoken to people, ex-Scientologists, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Pentecostals, and I always think to myself, what if at the end of all of it, one of these tens of movements that I've kind of explored, what if at the end of it all, one of them turns out to be the right one? And it's strange to think about because they're all claiming to be the right one.
All claiming to be the right one, the absolute right one. Yeah. Well, and in the book ends as I go back, I do not intend to connect with Injun. I intend to connect with someone else who then connects me with Injun, and I end up seeing her again. And I go to hear her speak in the Manhattan Center. So I'm going back to the place she's speaking. It's like they're singing the hymns, and I walk into that day thinking, and at this point, my kids are, I don't know what, 8 and 2. I don't know how old they're, but I have 2 kids. And I'm thinking, what if I have to go back? What if I go in and I know that it is true and I really, really need to leave my children like my mother did and go back?
Oh gosh.
And luckily I walked out, I'm like, no, I don't. But like that, it's like, I can feel it as I say it to you that morning because even honestly, I had to grieve losing the church.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is a weird thing that people don't understand, right? But it was still in me. Like, what if I go and hear her speak and I go in and I'm love bombed and they're love bombing me and I'm watching all of this? What if I realize that I have to leave my family like my mom did?
And luckily that wasn't something that.
And luckily I did not at all. And I do know it not to be true, but I do know my brain gets carved into thinking it still is sometimes.
A quick word from our sponsors. If you've ever needed a distraction or to be uplifted after listening to the heavy topics of this show, or even of everyday life, then I have a new podcast for you. A series of spoken comedy essays, short and funny and available now. Notes on Nothing is a sit-down comedy podcast, a series of short spoken essays on inconsequential subjects. Ever wanted to know more about certain topics and then realised you couldn't really be bothered to research them because it really isn't important? In the words of the host, this podcast is what happens when somebody actually follows through. Not in that way, you know what I mean. Notes on Nothing, a comedy podcast available today on Apple Podcasts and wherever you get your podcasts.
At what point during this journey that we've just gone through, does your mum have her pairing from Reverend Moon?
It's July 1st, 1982. Well, first she gets matched.
Yes.
She gets matched. She gets matched while I'm still a full believer. So, you know, probably I'm about 15 or so when my mom, you know, when there's the big matching, and she she goes down to the New Yorker and sits in that room and right. And so, you know, I'm sure you've heard generally what Moon would do would be like, you, and they would go out and they would talk to each other for 2 minutes and decide that they would marry each other. And when I've said that to people are like, really? They like talk to a stranger for 2 minutes and decide to get married? And I'm like, if the Messiah, who could see your spiritual being and was like next to God, told you to marry this person, would you say no?
Yeah.
Very few people say no. But with my mom, apparently he made her stand up and said, you know, she's got 2 children from another marriage who are sinful, right?
Oh,
Jacob's children have sinned. Who is going to take her on? And this nice man, Phil, raised his hand and said, I will. And I remember being so excited to have a father who believed in God and true parents and the Messiah. Yeah. And, you know, yeah, that was my first take on it. Yeah. And it was because I remember, because it was soon after that, I, the summer before I went to music camp, I went out to Seattle in Washington to proselytize for the summer. And I flew to Denver where Phil, my mom's, I guess, fiance, whatever, was living. And I spent like a day or two with him. And then I drove with the IOWC, the International One World Crusade, because my mom, I wanted to go work for God. And my mom just wanted to get rid of me and shipped me across the country for the summer because she spent a lot of time yelling at me that I was angry about her leaving. And I'm not angry. I have no anger. I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm not angry. Yeah. So she sent me away. Yes. And so that's when she got matched. And then she got married in 1982. And at that point I'd finished my first year at university and I was like pulling away and didn't want to be there and didn't want to see her. And just remember watching my true parents blessing all these people, and everyone I knew was getting married and I was sinful and had a boyfriend. And yeah.
And what was it like? What did it look like? Because there's the infamous iconic photos, and I always describe it as like a sea of white and red.
Sea of white and black, right? Because the men wore black, right? And the women wore white, and it just went like all over the floor of the garden, and it went on for hours as people walked in, and because at that point they would like walk through and they'd like walk through this area and Moon would be on one side and Mrs. Moon on the other and they'd be blessing them. And yeah, I you know, and people ask me, in full honesty, I had to research it to put it in the book because I think my brain went like this. No, right? It didn't take, the funny thing is, you know, there's one scene in the book that my mom told me and I put in the book. But other than that, everything else I remember. But one, memory is a very weird thing. It just is a weird thing, right? So who knows? And two, we jokingly say that I have no memories. Like I have so few memories actually from my childhood. It's amazing. I managed to piece together a memoir. At one point, you know, if the cover of the book is the building I grew up with my dad, and I was saying something to Robbie about it. And he said, you know, remember one time when we came home from Jacob House where my mom was, someone drove us home and Danny wasn't there and we didn't have keys. So we're locked out. So whoever drove us home climbed up the fire escape in the front of the building and broke in and let us in. Like, I got nothing. I don't like, well, that's not traumatic. Why don't I remember? I got nothing. I'm like, really? That happened? He's like, yeah. I'm like, I got nothing. Like there's so many times Robbie will say something. I'm like, I got nothing on that one. So
it's interesting that he gets to give you those perspectives, though, on little things that
he said I should actually write a book like Lisa's memoir as remembered by Robbie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, what happened then? Because he remembers it a lot, and I shut it all out. I remember so little of actually living with my dad in many ways. I shut down so much to stay safe that I don't remember it, I think.
I wonder if that's something to do with the slight difference in age as well.
Maybe.
Interesting.
We are awfully close, but maybe we'll be about as close as you. So we were 1 year, 5 months, and 14 days apart.
Very close together. Very close, yes. Yeah. And interestingly as well, I wonder if it's because of the attachment issues that you had with your mum growing up, you know, with
Yeah.
the fear of her leaving you, that maybe that played a part in your brain kind of stopping you from experiencing too much trauma. Just leaving you with just enough to write a memoir to let everybody know that there was some trauma.
I like to say, if like your childhood is interesting enough that you can write a memoir about it.
Yep. And you've mentioned that your mum is still a practicing member, and
No, she's not.
Oh, she isn't.
She's not. She well, it's interesting. So my oldest child was born in 1996, and my mom at that point was living in Washington, D.C., still a member of the church, not working in the church, but still involved in the community. And
still married to Phil.
No, she broke that up she broke that off a while before that. So like she was a rebel in the church even. She likes to say she didn't even do that well. So but she's still in DC, and she says she promised to come up for a week when I had my baby, help me.
Right.
And came up for a week, and then when she went back and they fired her from her job, even though they'd given her permission to go. So there she's in DC with no job. And as I said, my mom spent almost all her time in the church working in nurseries and caring for kids and taking care of little kids. So she came up at one point, and I said, oh, look, at New York University, they have this master's program in early childhood special education. Maybe you should do it. And she applied, and she got in, and she moved up. And then she just started a whole new life up near New York. And that's when she left. So she left in like 96. But in my very opinionated opinion, she never has really looked at it. She's never gotten therapy. Right. She's never dealt with it. And, you know, in some ways she's very supportive, but it wasn't until the book came out that she began to own some of what she did. Before then, she would literally call us up and be like, oh, I talked to so-and-so who I used to take care of. They're so traumatized because their parents left them. And we'd be like, yeah, they are. Gosh. Like she had no, you know, she's like, I never left you. You were always in my heart. I'm like, let's get this straight. You said, what should I do? We said, leave, and you left, and I never lived with you again. Or she just could not, she would say, I really wish you would get over that. Why? Like, you'll feel so much happier when you get over that. So only since the book has she begun to own the impact of what she did. But even still, like at one point she said to me, do you think I was brainwashed? And I'm like, you think? Like, would you have done what you did if you weren't? But recently we were talking about it, and she can't, like, to this day, at this point, she says, I believe I was led there. Like, or you were brainwashed and love bombed and indoctrinated. But so she, like, I know she doesn't, I don't think she thinks Moon is the Messiah, and she doesn't belong and she doesn't practice, but there's some part of her that still hasn't fully, you know, like the physically out, mentally in kind of thing. Like she hasn't fully said, it was a lie, right? It was bad. And I had gotten to the point before the book came out, I got to the point where I didn't need her to own it because I thought it would break her. And to this point, maybe it will break her. Like if I had left my children and had to own what I did and how it impacted my kids, it might break me. So maybe she can't fully see that it really was evil, actually. Really was evil.
Yes, actually. Absolutely. And I wonder if she says that she was led there to stop herself from having to admit that she was a victim of all of the awful coercive tactics that are used by these types of groups.
Yeah, that's exactly how the conversation started, because there's a chance someone will kind of make a script about this, and they were saying, well, you were a victim and your mom was a victim. And my mom said, I wasn't a victim. I don't think I was a victim. I'm like, really? Like, then why would you do that? But
I think that's a very hard thing for people to admit, though. I think one of the biggest things that comes across in these interviews with people that have had these experiences is having the strength to be able to sit down and look at your situation and know that you're not happy and you're not in the right place, but to be able to say that you are a victim and you have to change your situation by no longer being a victim. but that doesn't necessarily translate to you're weak. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, especially when I speak to a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses or people who are, I've been working on a segment lately on another Korean movement called Shincheonji. And all of the people I've spoken to won't use their real names, won't speak to me on an interview unless there's a voice modification program being used. A lot of people have agreed to speak to me and then cancelled last minute because they're so worried about the backlash or what will happen to them. And I think a lot of the people that want to speak are still practicing members. So whether they are sort of physically and mentally out and they just haven't told anybody officially that they want to leave, it's, and I think a lot of that comes down to obviously fear from them not wanting to use real names and stuff. But from the people I've spoken to, they are just terrified of thinking of themselves as weak and victims as well. And that's why they are still, and that's why a lot of the time people in these movements in Jehovah's Witnesses and those other types of religious movements as well, people are still in the movement because they don't want to admit to themselves that they are kind of in a place of being a victim, because I think some people see that as weak. That's not how, I don't think that's how I would perceive it, but I haven't personally been in that situation, so I can't speak.
It's not how I would see it either. It's not how I see it. Because I do believe we're all susceptible, right? Like, as I say, as human animals, we crave certainty, purpose, and community. And an extremist group or cult gives you absolute certainty. It is the most powerful feeling ever. You know, purpose, like beyond belief, and a community you'll never replicate. So it fills so many needs, right? And I was watching The Vow, and as he's like, nobody joins a cult. They join this really great thing, and then they discover, right? And most of them you join for like the vision of the Unification Church, right? All one family under God, and it's a beautiful vision. So there's a lot of reasons why, but and this is probably controversial. A lot of the things I say are controversial. In some ways, I absolutely think it's harder to leave as a second gen or third or fourth or fifth, whatever, in Jehovah's or something. But in some ways it's easier because whereas, maybe like I don't have a former past that I can go back to, but I don't have to blame myself for getting in there, right? That's, it's easier to say I was a victim because I was clearly a victim, right? I was clearly a victim. It's not like I chose to join on my own. Someone said to me, why'd you believe it? I'm like, well, why'd you believe whatever your parents told you to believe? Like, if your mom says this is the Messiah and everybody bows to him and takes their shoes off when he comes into the room and he has this aura, you believe, right?
Yep,
so
yep, absolutely.
In some ways it's easier to say I'm a victim when I clearly was a victim.
And you've mentioned briefly your life after the Unification Church, and when I was reading your story, I kind of, there's this phenomenon of people that go cult hopping or cult jumping.
Yes.
So they will jump from sort of one highly coercive group to another. And when I was reading through your story, I felt as though there was something similar happening, but not with different cults, but different things that were addictive, whether that was sort of your addiction that you've mentioned with drugs, or with your addiction around food and the control that you had over kind of how much food you were eating and or not eating, and developing sort of the eating disorder. And it just felt like there was definitely a pattern there, but you naturally fell into each of those things. So how do you, I mean, I don't really know what my point is here with this. I just thought it was interesting to look at how that happened as a result of you kind of leaving the church behind.
Absolutely. And if I were to be honest, and of course I am, so it's carved into my brain. What do I mean? So I've been out 40 years, right? I've been out about 40 years, and I am just learning that I can say or do or feel or be however I am, even if you don't like it and you don't know better than me. Because I am constantly still looking for that thing. Well, first of all, I'm constantly driven to do it right and not mess up. And I got in trouble even though I didn't. Like I'm just now like, you don't like that, and I can still wear it, feel it, do it. Like I'm literally, I said to my therapist, people do that? Like, it's mind blowing. And so I'm an executive coach. I own leadership consulting and executive coaching from an executive coach. And I was recently doing this training program on positive intelligence. I do a lot of positive psychology, a lot of different stuff. And it's a strong model. In my humble opinion, he was kind of presenting it as like, this is it, right? This is the model. And I could feel my brain needing it to be the model, like the model. This is it, the truth. Like, I'm still looking for the truth with the capital T. Mm-hmm. And I have to be like, whoa, there you go again. Pull back. There isn't one. You're like, maybe there isn't one. Maybe whatever, like, it's all mushy and we'll never know. But my brain still wants there to be someone to tell me what to do, what to think, what to feel, how to, like, this is the answer. This is it. Follow these rules. It is, the way so when the book came out, I was on Megyn Kelly's show, a morning show here in the States. And beforehand, they did an interview and the producer said to me, were you brainwashed? And I said, I didn't have a brain to be washed. I was pickled. And I firmly believe that I was like second gens, third gens, whatever, fourth gens, were pickled and carved. My brain has grooves that are carved intentionally by my cult, carved into it, that are very, I'm learning. They can be very challenging. I'm whole, I'm healthy, I'm happy, but I fall into those grooves without knowing it. I'm like, whoa, there I am again, looking for truth. And
do you think that's typical of people that have gone through similar experiences, that they will go from, because your whole life was on the weekends, and in the evenings and the mornings and any free time that you had, you were either thinking about or practicing or visiting the church. Everything, your whole life was the church. And it's almost like, I wouldn't say, well, I don't know if it was an addiction. I know that sometimes in movements like SGI, when we've spoken to people that have left SGI and things like the Hare Krishnas, that the chanting itself becomes an addiction because you do it as such a routine part of your day that if you don't do it, it's almost like if you are a smoker and you can't have a cigarette, it's like that need to do it. So do you feel like it's kind of typical for people who leave those types of environments that they're so used to, that they've given so much of their time to then fall to another crutch that they need to give as much of themselves to kind of keep some level of normality?
Yeah, I do, right? That's why they have the term cult hopping, because so many people do it. When I left, there wasn't a community. I did not know there was a community. And then, people say you make friends on Twitter, and I laugh, but I've made friends on Twitter. And one of my friends on Twitter told me about ICSA, International Cultic Studies Association, the Association for Cult Survivors. And I didn't know it was there, right? And so I went to the conference. And first of all, that's when I heard second gens. Like, I did not know there was a name for us, right? Like, whoa. And I like sat in a meeting of second gens, and somebody put up on the board or somewhere, like, what it does to your brain, how it affects you. And I forgot to take a picture. But I remember looking in that going, oh my God, that's my brain. That's every fight I've had in my marriage. And that's my brain. Like, that's exactly the way, and yeah. So I was in Al-Anon, and I ended up in Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I have this laundry list of children of alcoholics, and yes, always yes. Like, those are absolutely true. But this was like, oh my God. And I, since then I've gone back to Scotland to do presentations on cults for counselors there. And so there's 3 academics and an ex-JW and me. And he's a second gen JW. And one of the people will say something, and I look at him, and like, different cult, different country, although I want to be Scottish, but different country. And I know exactly what he's thinking, exactly what he's feeling, exactly like I'm identical to him on the inside. I know him more intimately than I do some of my dearest friends, and I don't really know him at all. Right. So I firmly believe, especially those of us, like, again, pickled and carved when your brain is forming, it does specific things to our brain that we play out less and less and less as we heal. But like, and I'm the one, like, there's a Facebook group for, second gens of the Moonies. And I'm like, something will happen. I'm like, we are just playing out all over the place. Right. We're playing out the hierarchies. We're playing out what your parent did to my parent. We're playing, like, we just go and we play it all out because we can't help it. Like, we just have to have compassion because, and I say this, but I still learn it. Right. So this past summer, I was in Minneapolis with my older child, and I was finally reading The Body Keeps the Score about trauma. And I was also reading My Grandmother's Hands, which is a book about racial trauma. So only I can read 2 trauma books at the same time. But I'm reading these 2 books about trauma, and my kid comes over and I say to them, so when my body does that reaction thing it does, or I have this, visceral, this emotional reaction, I actually can't control that because that's my trauma response. And they're like, are you an idiot? Yeah. Right. So like, it's still, I'm like, oh, but I have to have huge compassion because probably for the rest of my life, I'm going to have trauma triggers and I'm going to look for truth. Like I was literally with these other coaches in this program, and I'm like, look at me. I'm looking for this to be the truth. And I'm like crossing every T and doing it perfectly and never dropping anything. And somebody said, if I did it your way, I'd die, right? Because I'm all in, because it's truth. Because my brain is still craving that. Like, it has this big hole that had a plug. It is an addiction that had a plug of truth in it. And it's still, then I'm like, no, your truth. So what got me out of the church was, what if it's right, but it's not right for me? And now probably my next book is the line, what if it's not right, but it is right for me?
Okay. Interesting.
Like, I can do and be whatever I want. There's no right or wrong that I have to live to, which is just mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing.
And what I've really enjoyed about our conversation this evening has been that I've spoken to so many people about the Unification Church, and a lot of the time I've focused on the doctrine, the history, Moon himself, where he's come from. They're
much better at that than I am. If you talk to Teddy, absolutely. Yeah.
Teddy was talking about Reverend Moon's semen and passed around to people.
Semen is in the holy wine or holy salt. I was just like, I know, I heard these things in my brain. I was like, oh God, yes.
So we talked about all of those things.
Yes.
And Jen mentioned some of the history as well when I spoke to her. And but what I've really enjoyed talking to with yourself is more of your personal story and how personally you were affected by the types of cult-like methods of control that were used not only on you but on your mother. And just the contrast between trying to live a pure life under the church in an impure environment with your father, and all of his friends, and the drinking and the drugs and all of that stuff. And it's not a perspective I've had it is a pleasure. It's a pleasure for me to speak to you, but obviously it's not a pleasure for me to be like, oh, you suffered so much in your childhood, come and tell me about it. But I really do appreciate the perspective that you've been able to give us today. And I know that the listeners will be interested to hear more of a personal story and less of the kind of analytical, statistical, kind of historical side of things.
I am not good at the analytical stuff. I mean, when I left, none of that was there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's when in the last few years, meeting Teddy and finding Born Under the Moon and all that I've seen, and it was formed as a sex cult, like all this, that he has an illegitimate child who I knew when we were kids, didn't know he was Moon's kid. Like, I talk to him now, I'm like, I didn't know you were Moon's kid. He's like, I didn't know I was Moon's kid.
Yeah.
Right? Like all of that, I can only tell my personal story of, of it first, again, being a haven and then being disaster, right? It's people say like, well, first of all, people sometimes say to me, I'm reading a book, I'm really loving it, I'm really enjoying it. I'm like, great. But, people say you don't make the church sound bad in the book in some ways. And I'm like, let me be really clear. It was a cult and it is destructive. It was a haven for me when I got there, and I could only write what my experience was. And where there were people who were physically and sexually molested, if I was, I don't remember it, right? So I could only write my experience, and my experience was physically benign, emotionally and psychologically kind of messed up. But like, I wasn't sex trafficked and I wasn't beaten, and I wasn't, so I couldn't write about it, so I can only tell my story. But yeah, but my real story is what it did to my brain and how do we undo that, right? I do say my story is unique, but unfortunately the themes are universal. And even if you didn't grow up in a cult, a lot of people still have shame for stuff they should never have shame for, and guilt and shame and self-loathing that we need to get rid of that. We just need to get rid of that. So
And I think when people say that you don't paint the church badly, you're just such a young, innocent person, and that does come across. And when you said the church was like a haven, that's how, and the love that you got and how safe you felt, and being able to be with your mom, which is all you ever really wanted at that age, to be with her, and you got that chance on the weekends. But then the effects that the church has on you for the rest of your life, that's not a good place.
It's interesting because there's a friend my friend when I was in like 5th and 6th grade, right? When we moved in with my grandparents, and she became my best friend. And then we used to have this argument over whose family was more weird, because her parents were divorced and her mother wouldn't even let her father on the steps. And so we used to have this debate. And then when my mom left and then we left, she's like, you win. But so I reconnected with her because of the book. She found me because of the book. And she said to me, oh my God, apparently we used to take her with us on the weekends into 71st Street into New York City. And she said, I loved going there. Everybody was so nice and so warm and so loving, and we had fun and we played. She's like, I loved going there with you. It's like, okay, yeah, that's what it was for us. It was just like love people it was bad because my mom was there, but everybody loved us and adored us and took care of us. Yeah. So
yeah. And you wonder if a child whose parents have obviously a tumultuous relationship and have gone through kind of like a severe divorce, if a child wouldn't want to go to a place where they can experience all the love in the world from everybody, and it's it's unconditional, or so it seems unconditional at the time. Interesting. And I did actually want to ask you about what you think of the true children now, because I think one of them, if I'm right, one of them took their own lives.
One of them jumped off a building in Las Vegas. One of them at least OD'd, Hyojin, who I knew. So, my mom was like, really? I thought it was a heart attack. I'm like, of course, that's what they told you. Many of them have left.
And then you talk about one of them in the book being a little bit of a rebel when he was younger, and he's turned out to be like a really awful, horrible person.
Yeah, so I have a different view, right? Most of the second gens hate the true children, bar none. And I do not disagree nor blame. When I left, they were still kids, and I saw their lives sucked. It was so hard for them, right? It just was. And I do believe when people tell me like how horrific, the ones who stayed, how horrifically they paid out. Like when you're born with privilege like that, when you are the Messiah's children, whether or not you believe to be the Messiah, you again can get away with anything. Moon had billions and billions of dollars, so they've led these very privileged, very wealthy, very extravagant lives. I cut them a little slack because I know what it was to be them.
Yep.
And because I'm mushy and I hold duality all the time and I cut a lot of people slack, very few other people cut them slack, right? And I've gone back and forth with one second gen, it's close to my age. And she's like, but they're adults and they should be able to make a choice, right? And truth be told, at one point when I got back with Injun, I said to her, why? And she said, it's my family, right? And so I'm not going to probe, why and whether and if it's okay. And I'm not going to support the church, but I like, yeah, the youngest sons run Sanctuary Church where they are armed. They are armed. They are armed. They stormed the Capitol. They stormed our Capitol. They were there. I've seen videos, right? They're armed.
Oh, gosh.
It's terrifying. It's evil. And my heart still breaks for these people because, abusers abuse, right? And so their lives. So I'm that one person, like they will literally in our group, people will just tear them apart. And I don't say anything except to like a few people because I hold this space of, yes, and she was my friend and it really sucked. And she did some stupid things, but y'all are blaming her. Some of them are about the church and some of them are just being a person. So again, they're held to we're still doing it. We're holding them to these standards. So it's very, I don't talk about it often because she's in my phone. I don't talk to her, but I could.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's just interesting. I just wondered what your perspective was, but
no,
obviously
it's different than everybody else's.
Yes,
I think it's, I reconnected with one of my friends who no longer believes, but is someone was working with her and doing some stuff. And she said to me, first time I saw her after decades, I still bowed, right? It's ingrained. People in our Facebook groups use there's an honorific NIM, like Injanim, which we used to use because we need to honor them. People still use it. Like it's ingrained in us to treat them like these special people. But I hold I never intended to find her again. Finding her again was unbelievable. I don't know, I'm like, I don't even know how to have an equal relationship with you, but I'm glad I found her. It was my healing did involve finding just about every person and going to every place and going to Holy Rock and going to Barrytown and taking my child through the halls and seeing it again. But I know I hold a different, I've had intense conversations with other second gens, but I'm like, I am not negating your point of view. I cut them a little bit of grace because it was horrific to be them. So it's hard. It's hard
I
to
think
figure
that's
out.
fair enough. I think your story is very different to other people who grew up. Especially in terms of the relationships that you had with the true children.
They were just kids. They were just kids when we met them, and I know some of the stuff they suffered, right? And so I know why they became they're either all in the church and crazy or addicts or dead or have left or the agent was following a different messiah. They're messed up, right? But how would you be if you were the child of a narcissist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
There's recovery groups for children of narcissistic parents. And trust me, a messiah is pretty much as narcissistic as one can probably be. Because someone asked me, do you think he believed he was the Messiah? And when you look at the origins of the church, I don't know. But by the time I got there, I do think if enough people bow to you, you do think you're the Messiah. So,
Interesting.
That's my opinion. It's different.
Well, we've got to my last question of the interview before I ask you if there's anything you think we've missed. And that is to ask you what your advice would be for people who have experienced similar things in their group or movement and what they can do to assist in their recovery.
Yeah. There are support groups, there are counselors, there are therapists. Reach out, get help. There weren't when I left. Don't go cold turkey. Find someone. You are not alone. There's hope. There's a way. There's healing. It's hard. It gets easier. What does it say? It doesn't get better. You get better, right? It's definitely you talk to Jen, and Jen taught me to say that's the cult talking. Like, I've learned to identify the lies that I was taught that are still in my brain, but there is a way to separate. There's a way to get out. There's a way to find life on the outside. Yeah. I mean, when people ask me why I wrote the book, I'm like, I don't think I really thought it through, but why I'm promoting it, I have 3 key messages, and it relates to this. And the first is, extremist situations exist. As I said, I think I said before, they're extremely intoxicating, they're prevalent, they're dangerous, right? Did I say all 3 of these before? Maybe I did. I'll say them again. It happens, right? So for anyone who feels hopeless or damaged beyond repair, there is hope, and you're not damaged. When the book came out, like, I've been out for decades and I've healed in so many ways. And I think I realized I still thought I was damaged, right? I have damage, I have scars. I'm not damaged. It's very different. And I've been hopeless, and I can be hopeless, but it's much less. So for anyone who feels in that space, there is light, right? There is light, and you can, like, I will still look for truth, but it's not like it used to be. And then, as a species, from my work, from my life, I do believe that we are just, most of us, way too hard on ourselves and self-critical and self-judging, and we're just mean, and we need a huge dose of self-love and self-compassion, right? And and compassion for others, but first compassion for ourselves. So yeah, if you're in that space, go to icsa home.org, and there's a list of therapists and counselors and support groups, right? There's people all over the world who can help you find a way out. So, or reach out to me. Like, I can't help you, but I can help you find someone who can help you. So yeah. Yeah.
And Lisa's book is called To the Moon and Back. And it's a fantastic read. And it's definitely a great resource for anybody who's feeling as if they are unique in their situation and would like to find a connection with somebody who has gone through something similar. I feel like that would be a great tool for somebody to have that book as a companion going through those motions. But I do actually have one more question before we finish, and that is to ask you, this is more for my benefit, I guess. Did anybody reach out to you after reading your book and that you hadn't spoken to, kind of happy or unhappy with the way that they were portrayed in the book? I'm guessing your mum had a read, if she's taken some ownership of the things that happened.
So my mom had a read actually many times before the book actually came out.
Okay.
She was, never taking ownership of what she did, but very supportive of the book. But it's hard for her. Like, sometimes she'll come to readings and it's just really weird.
Yeah.
My dad, to this day, so Danny had a stroke like 13 years ago, and he's in a nursing home. He's in a home, and he lost the left side of his body and his right eye. And he's a very old 78-year-old man, and he still hasn't read it. And for a while he couldn't remember that I did it. And then he's asking me again to read it. And I was just like emailing my family going, do I let him read it? Cause like, he thinks the worst thing he ever did was leave me with my mom. So I haven't decided yet if I'm going to let him read it. I've had some people, so everybody in the book, just about everybody in the book I've reconnected with, everybody got the chance to like, do I use your name or not use your name? And if I couldn't find them, I didn't use their name. When the book first came out, I got trolled by 3 people, only three Moonies, who were like, one person said something like, I can't believe you made a whole book about being there on a weekend or 2. And I'm like, did you read it? Like, but so no, in the church, when I was on Megyn Kelly, the church put out a statement that said, we're so sorry Lisa was traumatized by her parents' divorce. It's very easy to leave the church. And then I met the person who wrote that quote, and she'd never read the book, because us second gen thought I should go to actually a church center and speak. And I'm like, why? But anyway, so I was talking to this PR person, and she'd never read the book. And I'm like, here, if you want the book. And she's like, oh, will you sign it? And I'm like, this is really strange. You're having me autograph my book and you're still a Moonie. Well, okay. And then my friend who was seduced by our Sunday school teacher, I never thought I'd reconnect with her again. And I did. And when the first time I talked to her, I'm going to cry. The first thing she said to me was, "I'm sorry I ruined your life." And in reality, she actually saved my life, because that was one of the first things. Like, if that hadn't happened, who knows how long it would have taken me to leave. And then when I did see her, and when I saw her, she said, "At first I hated you for telling my story." And I'm like, yeah, but like, I changed your name. I hide the details a little bit. No one's going to know it's you. And I get that. And that's the only person, like, Injun knows the book is out there. I don't know if she's ever read it. I haven't actually seen her since the book came out, but yeah, and everybody else pretty much owned it, or some people I haven't talked to since it came out. But yeah, nobody pushed back too hard, except my dad probably would, but he hasn't read it. So yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. That's
Yeah.
And the Sunday school teacher is the musician.
No, the musician is Hugh, and the Sunday school teacher is Brian.
Brian, okay, because I thought Brian and Hugh were both in the band.
No, Hugh was in the band. Brian was not in the band.
Right. Okay. So you would go to the concerts
but like, I have reconnected with both of them. And Brian, he read it, and, my brother said, I haven't talked to him in a long time. And when I used to, Robbie be like, and like, I didn't find, this is one of those weird things. I hadn't found him. Like, I really looked for him, and I looked for all these people, because I needed to like touch it, and I couldn't find him. And I literally woke up one morning and I thought, okay, I'm going to try one more time before his birthday. I knew when his birthday was. I'm going to try one more time to find him. And that day I went and I got a massage, and I came out of the massage, and there was a LinkedIn message from him. And I was like, whoa,
no, that's spooky.
I made him find me. And then he came, and I saw him one day, and he was just as, let's just say that the way he messed with my brain and everything did not end when I was 16. And he was like, "It should have been you." I'm like, thank God it wasn't me. Thank God you picked her. It was like, whatever. So I don't talk to him anymore. Every now and then. Oh, I hope he doesn't hear this. But anyway, when he first, when he read the book, and he realized he actually owned, to his credit, he owned what he had done to her and to me. Because if you remember, there's one point where he almost forces me to sleep with him, but he doesn't. He almost does. And that's his name. He's like, "No, I have to own it. That's my name." So his name is real. A lot of them are wrong, but I've just outed him completely. His name is real. Yeah, because
I just thought it'd be interesting for any of the listeners that do go away and decide to read the book, or anyone who has read the book and is listening to this now, to kind of just wonder what his perspective was reading that back about how he came across in the book and what he had done. So thank you for sharing that insight with us as well.
And memory is a weird thing, right? Memory is a really weird thing. So I have this tattoo, and it's a circle, and I got it before the book came out, because my dad's girlfriend, whose name is Alice in the book, she became a tattoo artist, and I remembered it. It's exactly what she had, and exactly what she gave to all the women in my dad's circle of friends. It's not exactly what she has, nor do they all have the same thing, right? But it's exactly what I remember. So I got it, one, to represent, owning that part of my life, and two, because memory's weird, right? So all I can say is, there are like some lines I absolutely remember, maybe they happened, and situations that I remember and kind of put together, but memory is weird.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it's only my perspective. Like, it's my perspective of what happened, but it's my truth.
Fantastic. Well, Lisa, is there anything you would like to add, or anything you think that we've missed before we finish our call today?
I don't think so, other than thank you for staying up so late with me.
It's honestly, it's such an honor, such a privilege.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to speak with you, and thank you for what you're doing and the stories you're sharing, and for the chance to tell my story. And I hope to stay in touch, and one day I'll visit Liverpool, and I'll meet both your children, because by then you will have the second one for sure.
Yes, baby Colt Volt on the way. Fantastic. Well, I have just really enjoyed not only talking over email, but also getting to know you through your book, and then having the opportunity to sit down with you this evening and have this exchange and talk about some of the things that, not every person gets to read a book they really enjoy and then sit down with the author and have like undisrupted access to that person's kind of information and knowledge. Every time you read a book, there's always questions and things you want to know more about, and I'm really lucky to have had that experience and opportunity tonight. And I just think it's so important that people keep sharing their stories and keep coming forward and letting others know that they're not on their own, and that there are resources and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And you are a living, breathing example of that after everything you've been through. So thank you so much for coming and speaking with us, Lisa. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Casey. I hope you enjoy your evening. It's been truly delightful. Yeah, the hashtag I use now when people reach out to me is we are all in this together, right? Like we got to join together and help each other heal from all of it. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll speak to you soon.
I hope so.
Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. To get in touch, please email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.